Every so often, I will quote a project and something will pique my interest. And sometimes when this happens, I might give a lower price than what I probably should have. Now, you could call me a terrible businessman because of this, and you'd probably be right, but it's not always about business. Sometimes it's just about the love of the game. And the game in this instance was a 9-foot by 5-foot steam shower with every different fixture that you could possibly imagine. Now, up until this point, I hadn't actually done a steam shower, and it's something I've really wanted to do for quite some time. However, in the past, anytime I've had a client inquire about them, the high price point has always driven them away. So when I was writing up this quote, against my better judgment, I lowered the price by quite a bit in order to secure this job, and even Sebastian was questioning my sanity. However, now that the job is complete, I can confidently say that I don't regret this decision at all. This turned out to be one of my all-time favorite projects, and I think you guys will find it very interesting. And if a really cool final product wasn't reward enough, with the vast scope of this project and different elements involved, I can also say that I think I am now better at my craft after having done this than I was beforehand. And sure, that happens on every job to some degree, but this one really just felt like it took it up a notch. Now, with the overall size and scope of this project, it dawned on me that we might just need a little more horsepower. So, enter Jared. Jared had actually reached out to me over email expressing a desire to learn and just kind of see how we tackle these types of projects so that he can improve his own skill set. And that really resonated with me. He actually offered to work completely for free, and while this was a very tempting offer, I do unfortunately have something called a conscience that restricted me from taking him up on that offer. So I did pay him for his time helping us on this project, and he was well worth it. Anytime you take on someone new, you do run the complete risk of getting a complete dodo bird. However, it was a pleasant surprise to find out that not only was he not a dodo bird, but he was in fact very competent. Jared actually does have his own construction company in the Niagara region, so if anyone out there is watching and they're in need of a renovation of any kind residential, you can reach out to him. I will have his information linked in the description below, and seriously, a big thank you to Jared for helping us out on this project. Every time I post one of these videos, I get countless comments from people telling us what a waste of a renovation this was, how there was nothing wrong with the old bathroom, and that we're stupid and we should be disappointed with ourselves. Okay, maybe not those exact words, but you get my meaning. And to be honest, I actually really liked the existing bathroom from this project. But at the end of the day, it's not up to me or any of you guys. It is only up to the homeowners. It is their hard-earned money, and it is their decision at the end of the day. But with that being said, perhaps I can provide a little more context onto why this renovation might make a little more sense than you might initially think. As you can see here, the existing bedroom was 24 feet in length. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I have absolutely no clue what I would do with that amount of space for a bedroom, or especially this area here. So the homeowner very cleverly came up with this design in which he could take over the existing closet space to be a larger bathroom and then create a giant walk-in closet and still have a very sizable bedroom. So of course, while we all hold our own opinions, I personally believe that this was a very intelligent redesign and a much better use of the existing space. If you are familiar with the channel, you would know that typically in these videos at the bottom left corner of the screen, there is a counter for which day of the project we are on. And assuming you have the power of sight, you would now realize that that counter is not present. The reason being is actually that while this video is focused solely on the bathroom you are seeing, this project did actually have a second bathroom that we were working on at the same time. And while not as big or as involved as this one here, it still took up a lot of attention and created a very irregular timeline for us. So having a day counter just wouldn't really make a ton of sense as so much of our time was divided between the two bathrooms. So instead, I will just let you know that this whole thing took about 5 weeks. You're probably wondering about now why everything just turned purple and what happened. So let me provide a little more context. While we were here for just the bathroom renovations, the homeowner and his cousin were actually renovating the rest of the top floor as well as a few rooms on the main floor. So after our demo was complete, I did just run a few mechanical items in those exterior walls, and then we took off for a couple days while everything got spray foamed. On top of this, there was actually a beam in this bathroom that had completely failed. It looked like a pack of wild beavers had got into it. This is Canada after all. And so it was replaced by another contractor with a nice big steel I-beam. But with that being done, I could move on to some framing work. So I did just start out by relocating the door to accommodate the new floor plan. And then we did move on to creating a curbless shower. I would say that about 90% of the bathrooms we do feature a curbless shower, as it has just become a really popular trend. And it's one that I personally like a lot. Now, a lot of people are skeptical of these, and I do understand. However, when they are done correctly, they are perfectly safe, and they really just give the bathroom that next level feel, or at least that's what I think. I do have a couple of videos on the channel that will provide more detail on how we create these, but the basic idea is just to recess these 2x4s so that the new subfloor pieces we insert will be flush with the top of the existing joists, and that way our shower pan, which will have the slope towards the drain, as it does have a thick perimeter, we will not have to build up the existing subfloor as much, and that way we avoid any really hard transitions anywhere else in the bathroom or where the bathroom meets the bedroom. We did run all new drains for all of the fixtures in this bathroom, and you can see I did try to get a 2-inch drain over for this shower, as there will be so many fixtures. I'm not here to tell you what your local code requires of you. However, I am here to complain about 2x8 joists and how little room they leave for mechanical items. So if you're in a scenario like this one here, in which you need to bring a drain across the framing and there's no other path to do so, if you tried to use a 2-inch P-trap, well, guess what? That means your hole has to be right at the top of the joist, which is obviously a big no-no, and man, do I just really hate these things. With the vast majority of our projects, if not almost all of them entirely, there is a finished ceiling below the bathroom space in which we're working. This means that running mechanical items has to be done entirely from above. However, on this project, we were really fortunate in the fact that we did have access from below. This meant that we could close up the subfloors a lot earlier than we otherwise would have. And not only that, but we could then continue running mechanical items from below. It's just a lot safer and easier to go about things this way, and it's a nice little treat that we don't usually get to have. A little over 3 years ago, I had to install my first ever freestanding tub, and I remember being so nervous leading up to it. I didn't know what to expect, and all I could think about was, what if something goes wrong? Fast forward to today, and man, what a relief it is when a client tells me they want a freestanding tub. This isn't to say that built-in tubs are some sort of nightmare to work with, but they are a ton more work. This one here was actually for an undermount installation type, and this was our first time doing that. We started off by just getting the tub into the rough position and then setting the feet so that it was perfectly level. We put in a couple bags of mortar for a mortar bed and inserted the tub onto that, double, triple, quadruple checking that this thing was perfectly level. Now, in hindsight, I absolutely should have connected the drain and overflow prior to this step. However, it wasn't the end of the world. Obviously, it was very accessible, so I was able to do that the next day. After the mortar had had a chance to fully cure, we did continue with the rest of the framing for the enclosure for this tub, and there was a lot of very crucial measuring happening at this point. Because the tub would eventually be getting a custom quartz top for it, we did have to make sure that all of the surrounding framing was perfectly level, plumb, and square. We did just use a laser to kind of set the top for all of our framing, and we kept it a 1/2 inch lower. That way, when we put our 1/2 inch backing board on top of it, those two surfaces would be completely flush. Now, unfortunately, in the middle of the tub, it did just have a bow in it, so that did kind of dictate a bit of a gap when it came to putting the quartz in, but that was just beyond our control. Now, in terms of deciding how big to make this box, I did just consult with my countertop guy to see what the minimum distance he would recommend from the tub edge to the framing, so that the quartz would have enough strength in it to be one solid piece and not crack in the future. So we did keep that to about 6 inches at the back and front of the tub here, and then a little wider on the sides just for the aesthetic and overall design of the room. A couple other things to note is we did just leave a bigger gap right here for an access panel, and in terms of the front framing, I probably should have just sheathed the thing with plywood or OSB instead of this wacky side framing that you see now. Now you might be wondering why we're framing a half wall this big. What could this possibly be for? Well, the clients had asked me if a shower long niche was feasible, to which I said, absolutely it is. And then your next question might be, well, do you really need a 9-foot long niche? And to that, my answer would be, no, you don't, in the same way that I don't need to have a beer at the end of the day. That's just something I want. In all seriousness though, I do think that this was a really solid idea. It was the perfect combination of functionality and aesthetics, and I wouldn't have changed a thing myself. We were able to build these two half walls and then put them into place, keeping a nice 18-inch gap between them at about torso height. Later on, we added some accent tiles, some quartz tops and bottoms, and then some warm accent lighting, and the whole thing came together beautifully. But the fun didn't stop there, as there were still a ton of features to add to this behemoth of a bathroom. Like this bench, for example. We ended up framing this out to be 18 inches tall, 24 inches deep, and almost the entirety of the width of the shower being just under 5 feet in length. On top of that, we did heat the top of the bench, which is such a nice feature. One of my biggest problem with these built-in benches is just how cold porcelain tile can get, especially here in the Canadian winters. So by adding some heating cable below the top of this thing, really just take it that next level and have a much nicer seat. Now, of course, I've mentioned that this is a steam shower, but what some of you might not be aware of is that means that the ceiling needs to have slope to it as well. This might not be something you would think of initially, but what happens in these rooms is as the steam fills the area, water starts to condensate on that ceiling, and eventually it'll form into droplets that will then fall down onto the users. And that would be very cold and annoying and just not what you want from your luxury steam shower. And so we slope the ceiling. Now, typically this would call for 2 inches per foot, but we talked to the client about it and he said that was absolutely ridiculous. He didn't want that. And I completely agreed. That seems way too dramatic. So instead we kept it to 1 inch per foot, or in other words, 5 inches over the 5-foot shower. Now I have had feedback from the client that this has not been an issue at all. So it seems like our compromise worked out really well. And I also think that the subtle slope in the ceiling here actually added a point of interest and created a really cool effect. Now, unfortunately, the framing above was not with us when it came to this. Had they ran the other way, of course, we could have just sistered framing to it to get all of our slope. So instead, we did have to create these custom pieces by ripping down 2x6s. This worked out well enough. Sebastian and Jared were able to shim out the pieces as needed to ensure everything was perfectly flat. And that was really important because we would be tiling this eventually with a large format tile, which means that everything needed to be perfectly flat, because the last thing we'd want is to have bad coverage on a very heavy ceiling tile. As mentioned, the access from below meant that I could run all of the mechanicals after the fact, so we were able to get this 1/2-inch PEX type A to the shower, tub, toilet, and vanity, various electrical lines throughout, and even a nice thick 3/4-inch copper line for the steam unit, which was actually located in the basement and ran up into the shower where it would fill it with steam. That copper pipe was later wrapped with rigid insulation, of course, and I was careful to maintain a certain slope to it as per the guidelines from the steam unit. Now, I won't be going into too much more detail on the mechanical rough-ins for this project, so if that is something you are interested, I will be posting a members-only video on the project a week after this one, along with a bunch of the more nitty-gritty information if you have any interest whatsoever in that type of thing. This here is a primer for the self-leveler that we would be pouring in this space, as we were out of level 1 inch over 5 feet. And that just wasn't gonna work when it came to the slope of the shower. I did just use a cheap latex caulking to fill any of the gaps to prevent this leveler from leaking anywhere. And then you can see I just took a level to kind of screed it out. Do not be fooled by the name of this product. It is not self-leveling. I don't care what it says. If you just pour it blindly, you're not gonna have good results. You really gotta try to figure this stuff out and work it to be level. And of course, because this is a curbless shower, anything we do to the shower floor, we need to match on the outside of it so that we get that seamless transition. So we did also have to pour some leveler outside as well. This here is a manifold style shower valve, and I really like these things. What they do is essentially water comes into that bottom port there, and then you control the temperature from that valve. Every valve above that just controls whether or not water will go through it and feed whatever fixture it is designed for. So in this shower here, we did have 6 body jets, a standard shower head, a ceiling mounted rain head, and an adjustable handheld. And while all of this was very cool, and when it came time to finishing everything, putting the fixtures in, testing it all out, it did all work really well. I do have to mention that this is one of those cheaper Wayfair fixtures. I bring this up because I think it's important to talk about when to spend money versus when to save it. When I talk with my clients, I always suggest spending money on brand names for plumbing fixtures. The reason being is that these cheaper brands don't have the long-standing reputation or warranty system that the bigger brands do. You can have a 20-year-old Moen shower valve fail on you and they will just send you replacement parts, no questions asked. Whereas on the flip side, this brand might not even exist in a couple years' time. Now the trade-off, of course, is that if you went for the setup that you see here, but by Moen or Kohler, for example, you could easily spend 5 times as much, if not more. So of course, my advice has to be to go with the one that has stood the test of time, the one that's safe, the one that is a lot less likely to fail on you in the future, as you typically don't want to take any chances when it comes to water. However, I do say all of this, and in my very own shower at home, I have a cheap Amazon fixture myself, so I can't say that I'm setting a very good example. This is 1/2-inch Weedy board, and we will be using it as a waterproof backing board for the tile on the shower ceiling. While the rest of the shower enclosure will be featuring the Schluter Curdy waterproofing system, I just don't have enough faith in it to hold the heavy 24x48 large format porcelain tiles on this ceiling. While I do love Curdy board, at the end of the day, with how easily I've ripped off the fabric by hand, I just wasn't sure about using it for the ceiling here, whereas Weedy is a lot more solid. On top of that, Schluter says you can't use other modified thin sets with their products, and I really wanted to use my favorite non-sag thin set for the ceiling, which is ProLite, and Schluter says you can't use that on their product for reasons, I guess, so Weedy was the product we went with. Typically for soundproofing interior walls, we would be using Rockwell's Safe and Sound. However, the client on this job did inform us of an alternative in Owen's Quiet Zone. It is about half the price as Rockwell's Safe and Sound and compares quite well in terms of its intended purpose. Now, it doesn't have the added benefit of being fireproof like Rockwell is. However, if we're being honest here, I don't know that I've ever installed it with that as a focus. After installing this product, I will say that I did greatly prefer working with it over Rockwell, so don't be surprised if you see more of this on future projects. At this point in my career, I haven't used a ton of different waterproofing systems. However, I have used 3 of the main types, those being liquid membrane, sheet membrane, and sealant waterproofing based systems. Now, if I were to rank these systems in terms of ease of installation, it would be as such. So you might be asking then, well, why don't you just make the switch to a sealant-based system? And that's because we do also have to factor in the cost. So if we were then to rank those systems based on cost, it would suddenly look like this. And look, I am a huge believer in using more expensive tools and materials if they can save on time, but only when it makes sense. If we were to have done the shower in Weedy, as an example, it would have cost twice as much, and we would not have saved enough time for that to have made sense. Now, of course, product prices and selection will vary a lot by area. For example, I know that there are some places in the States where you could buy a product like GoBoard for half the price as Curdy board, and it's a sealant-based system. So if I lived in one of those areas, I'd likely be using Schluter shower pans alongside GoBoard on the walls, because that just seems to me like it would be the most cost-effective and time-efficient building technique. Of course, there would be a downside to that, being that you would void the manufacturer's warranties. And that is something that we do actually value here. Having that lifetime warranty on our shower enclosures backed by Schluter does offer a bit of a comfort and selling feature to potential clients. Ultimately, what I'm saying with all of this is that there is a lot that goes into choosing which waterproofing system you should be using. You have to factor in material cost, installation time, product availability, and any manufacturer's warranties. I do also just want to take a second to acknowledge a sort of paranoia I've seen growing in this online space. People really just doing too much, in my opinion, with their systems. Seeing a lot of Schluter systems with RedGuard put over top of the banding and things of that nature. And I totally understand. I'm sure a lot of people watching this video right now are here because their shower is actively leaking into their kitchen or something similar. In fact, many of my clients found me because their showers were leaking. And in all of the showers I've ever demoed, every single leak has either been the result of no waterproofing system in place or one that was hacked together and done incorrectly. For the rest of the bathroom area, we will just be making use of this 1/2-inch green board, which is just a mildew-resistant drywall. There is also, of course, purple or blue board, depending on your area, which should just kind of be that next step up. And then, of course, standard drywall, which doesn't have any of that mildew-resistant properties to it. In my experience, green board is more than enough. I think the paint and primer you use is probably more important, in my opinion. And, of course, having really good ventilation is going to be the biggest contributing factor to how your bathroom holds up. But I should mention, in this bathroom specifically, every square inch of wall will be receiving a large format porcelain tile, so I think all of this was probably irrelevant anyways, but it never hurts to go that extra mile. As I'd mentioned, because we did pour self-leveler within the shower space, we need to try and match that outside of the shower space as well, so that we can have a seamless transition. So fortunately, this floor wasn't too out of whack. However, we did just have to pour in this small area you see now. If you're still watching the video at this point, I hate asking this, but if you just want to take a quick second, check to see if you're subscribed, or maybe just hit that like button really quickly. It really helps out the channel. These videos take a long time to make, so regardless, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Full disclosure, we should have absolutely applied the sealant for the weedy in between the panels as we were installing them. That did just completely slip by me. However, I will also say that if this shower fails in the future, at the ceiling, past the large format porcelain tile, epoxy grout, weedy, and surface sealant, I will post a video of me eating my entire hat raw, uncooked, and with no seasoning of any kind. In other words, we should have done better. However, I will not be losing a single millisecond of sleep over this. I do like to prep the shower drains in advance, and because we're doing a heated shower floor here, I do just need to add a bit of that heating mat underneath the drain to accommodate the increased height. So I'll stick that down as it is a peel and stick adhesive. I can insert the foam spacers that come with the shower span, those white pieces there, and then I can put a long piece of ABS into the drain, insert that into the trap, measure my distance that remains, and then that's the amount I can cut off that ABS, and that will be the correct length of pipe for my drain, and then I can all glue it in when we start waterproofing. As I mentioned, we will be heating the shower bench, and this is just the peel and stick Ditra heat membrane. So the bench top here will be getting a nice sizable piece of this, and then the rest of the bathroom floor will get the same membrane. We will also be adding this into the shower floor as well. However, we have a few additional steps before we can get to that. Earlier, I had mentioned using certain products and when it makes sense versus when it doesn't, and the importance of calculating the material cost versus the time saved. This is a product where I firmly believe that the time saved is worth the additional cost. Of course, you can still buy the traditional Ditra that has to be thin setted down to the floor. However, when I factor in all of that thin set, all the extra time of working with it, installing it, the mess it makes, this is just so very worth it.
We're almost done. We're almost done.
What are you doing, man?
Come on.
Even though we don't have the heating mat down in the shower space yet, we can still run our heating cable, and that is because we actually have two different cables. When you're doing a heated shower floor, at least with the Schluter system, you do need two separate zones, so you'll have one cable for the general bathroom floor, and then a separate cable for the shower floor. This is a 72-inch by 72-inch Schluter-Curdy shower pan. That is what is going to give us all our slope towards the shower drain as well as just being waterproof. However, we do have to cut down the width of it as our shower is only 60 inches wide, and then the length of it will actually be too short, so we'll have to extend that with dry pack in just a moment. But before we get to that, we are going to start by just waterproofing our ceiling and walls. That way we don't have to be walking on our waterproofed floor and risk damaging it as we carry on with this step. I sometimes get people asking, well, wouldn't it make more sense to do the floor first? Because then you could band over top of that, similarly to a roof where you'd have overlap going the direction of the water. And to that I say, no, we are not building a roof. We are building a waterproof enclosure. It's not meant to repel water. It's meant to hold it if need be. The whole idea with this system is that the banding will bond to the banding. As such, water will never be able to penetrate it, no matter what order you install your banding. Once we got the majority of our walls waterproofed, we then inserted the shower pan here. And as you can see, we did just have to extend it a little bit with some dry pack. After the dry pack had a chance to set up, we were then able to install more of this Ditra heat mat in the shower space. However, this time we did use thin set to bond it to the shower floor. Once that was all inserted, we were able to then run our heating cable through the entirety of the shower floor, create a little notch in the curdy board on the shower bench, which we then ran the heating cable up all over the surface of the bench top, and then we could carry on with the waterproofing. This is one of my least favorite parts of the entirety of the Schluter system, is doing these heated shower floors, just because after you've ran all your cable, you've done all these steps, you still have to waterproof all of that cable now. So you'll see we go back with more thin set and apply the giant rolls of curdy membrane over the entirety of the floor. And that's just a lot of extra steps. On top of that, because of the way that the Ditra membrane works with those dimples, when you're putting your thin set in and you're trying to collapse those ridges, when you're putting the membrane on, you have to work really hard to collapse all those ridges properly and not get any buildup of thin set. Not that this would be a huge issue for the large format tile we'll be putting in. However, if you are using a mosaic or a smaller tile, this could absolutely contribute to some little bits of lippage if you aren't careful. So it is just a tedious step in my opinion. Finally, after days of prep, we can lay our first tile, and what an exciting moment this is. For the shower floor here, we will be using the same tile that will go over the rest of the bathroom floor, and that is a 24 by 48 inch porcelain tile. Now this is a matte or a honed tile, meaning it's very grippy and suitable for a shower floor like this one, although I do have some people that are still always worried nonetheless. And for the installation, we will be making use of this envelope cut. I do have a dedicated video on the channel if you're interested in learning how to make one of these cuts, but that's just where we add the diagonal relief cuts so that these tiles can conform to the 4 planes of slope that make up this shower pan. Our grout lines will be 1/16 of an inch, although when it comes to these envelope cuts, I do tend to cheat those just a little bit so that I can line everything up and have it absolutely perfect. We will be making use of the Perfect Level Master tile system to get rid of any little bits of lippage. It's not going to pull the tiles out of their slope, don't worry about that. And for this shower, we are using the tileable drain grate. So when I do these, I do just like to leave a 4" by 4" square in the center. And then if I have time later on, I'll cut it out, put it into place with about a 1/8 inch gap around it. Although oftentimes I will actually cut that piece out on a different day. It is important as you're doing this to just check for level. You want to make sure that everything's going towards that drain. It's kind of the whole purpose of the shower. And then for our thin set, we are using Schluter's all set thin set with a 1/4" by 1/4" by 1/2 inch U-notch trowel. Every piece of tile is getting back buttered. And when you're using tiles with veining in it like this, you really want to check and make sure you're not putting any duplicates beside each other, and we will do our best to keep that veining flowing through multiple tiles, although sometimes that is a lot easier said than done. We do have the DeWalt Grabo, which is just a battery-powered vacuum lifter to help lift these tiles into place. We're going to use directional troweling, of course, getting those trowel lines in the same direction so that we can then kind of shake the tile back and forth to collapse those ridges and get really solid coverage. Now, unfortunately, because of the layout of this floor, I did kind of have to stand on some previously set tiles to continue with the installation. However, please note, you should never stand on a set tile. I was keeping it so that where I was only standing on a tile 15 minutes max after the time of which it was set. For tiling the walls, the installation process is very similar. However, I will be back buttering the wall itself, and then we'll trowel out the thin set onto the back of the tiles. I just find it to be a little cleaner with these large tiles that way. We do have that laser line set to establish the height of our first row, as it's so very crucial to get that to be perfect. And then we did just start with about an 18-inch rip of tile for our first row. There were a lot of factors that went into determining the height for that first row. I had to kind of go around to each wall, make sure that that would make sense. It would look good everywhere. We'd have nice full tiles when possible throughout the bathroom. So I could make a whole video on trying to determine how you go about calculating and making that decision. But just know this to me was the optimal rip of tile to start off this wall. For this bathroom, we did just aim to get one wall a day, and then we'd also try to get a wall done in the other bathroom in the same day, and that just kind of kept things moving and enabled us to work efficiently. The only difference really between the wall and floor tile was that the wall tile was glossy versus the floor being a matte tile. And so anytime we're using a glossy tile, we do just have those protection plates that you can get with the Perfect Level Master system. And that way, when you go and remove your wedges the next day, you don't risk scratching that glossy surface of the tile. I do just also want to mention that in the tub you are now seeing there is a very thick moving blanket protecting it. Do not fear. I sometimes get some people concerned about that. I promise you, we treated this tub with extreme caution. If you're considering doing a bathroom for yourself or maybe a tile project and you're wondering what tile size to use, and maybe you're watching this and loving the look of these large 24 by 48 inch tiles, I would probably recommend you stay away if it is kind of your first time. While these tiles are beautiful, they look great, I just don't know that they're really first time tile setting material. Instead, I would always recommend a 12 by 24 inch or 24 by 24 inch. They're just a lot easier to work with, to cut, to install, and they won't risk breaking as easily as one of these ones will. Every so often when you're setting tiles, you get a wall that really makes you question what you're doing with your life. And that was this wall on this project. Had about 20 perforations, so different cutouts that we had to accommodate for, a door, and just a whole lot of extra hassle involved to get this wall set with these large tiles. And then, of course, disaster struck. So yeah, that was extremely scary, and thank God Jared didn't get hurt there because that could have been a lot worse than it was. In terms of what happened, I believe that because there was an outlet cut out on that tile, with the way that the grabbo was situated, it applied pressure in just such a unique way that it was enough to cause the entire tile to just split in half. Of course, this job is a dangerous one. There's no getting around that, but we can do all sorts of different things to mitigate accidents. However, in that scenario, it really was just a freak accident, and I'm still not entirely sure what caused it. I can only speculate. Cracked tiles can be extremely sharp, and they're not something to mess around with. I myself have gotten stitches in the past from a cut I received from a cracked tile. However, unlike Jared, I was being a complete idiot. It was during a demo project, and I just decided to use my arm as a hammer, I guess, so that one was deserved. I would just like to point out that around the door jamb, we did just make use of tile profiles to get a nice finish, cap off the sides of the tiles, and get a really clean look. This was the only area in the project of which we used the tile profiles. Everywhere else, we did just use quartz pieces, or we mitered the tiles so that they would wrap around any corners. When it came time to tiling the ceiling, we are now using Pro Light non-sag thin set for its incredible sticking power. As you can see, we're able to set the tiles, and then through just the sheer strength of that thin set, they are supported. Now, we did eventually get a zip pull up to just kind of be extra safe, extra cautious here, at least for the initial setting of the tiles. However, in future projects, I think it would be in my best interest to get a few more zip pulls just to be extra safe. And on top of that, I do think this would have been a good case scenario for using the vibrating tool. That's just a tool that, as it sounds, vibrates, and that would help collapse those ridges to just be extra safe and ensure that we have 100% coverage. That did mark the end of the white tiles for this bathroom though, and now we could move on to this gorgeous 16 by 48 inch textured ceramic tile, which we'll be using for a couple of accent pieces. This tile was meant to kind of mimic the look of wood, and man oh man did I ever think this stuff was gorgeous. A big problem I have with so many of the bathrooms we build is how cold they can feel, and by adding this accent tile in, it immediately warmed up the entire space and just made it feel really welcoming and cozy. And I get a lot of this is all just personal preference, but hey, I got the platform, so I'm gonna give it. I love this tile, I love what it did for the bathroom, and I hope to do more of this kind of stuff in the future. I believe that we used ProLite for this wall, and in my mind, that meant we wouldn't have to do a ledger board or have any sort of reverse clamps to hold these tiles up. However, clearly I must have been wrong because the guys here did make use of those clamps to support them. In retrospect, if this had been the case and I'd known that, I probably just would have installed a ledger board underneath just to help support those tiles as the thin set cured. But nonetheless, they got the job done. They used that laser to make sure everything was absolutely perfectly level, and that's going to really help once it comes time to installing the quartz pieces. If you haven't used a textured ceramic tile before, I should also note that you have to be extremely cautious when working with these because the slightest touch on the edge will cause chipping. Even when you open the box, you're going to find a few that are chipped just from the factory, just from transportation. Just be super careful. With the wedge system, you notice we do have those protective plates, and again, that way when we remove the clips, it's just a little safer and less likely to cause any of those microchips. Around the sides of the tub here, I did just choose to miter these tiles. I thought it would be the cleanest look. And this was a really interesting tile to miter just because of the slat texture to it and how wavy they were. There were different thicknesses at different points. So I did just have to get those as tight as I could and then have the epoxy pick up on some of the minor differences in thickness. The way in which we laid out these tiles had another purpose, and that was to accommodate a hidden access panel for this tub. So the whole idea is that this center tile here would be removable through magnets. That way you would have access to the mechanicals of the tub and the tub filler as well. I don't think I really touched on this yet, but the bathroom did feature this beautiful skylight, but it did unfortunately have a popcorn texture. So Sebastian did sand that away and then skimmed it all out to get a nice smooth finish. And we also put in a 150 CFM Panasonic Whisper exhaust fan with a 6-inch duct. In hindsight, I should have held off on putting in the back of the niche tiles until those quartz pieces for the top and bottom were in, just because of the texture of the tile itself. I think it would have been a cleaner and easier install to do it the other way around. The difference between the thinnest and thickest parts of this tile was only 1/8 of an inch. However, it just would have been a whole lot easier to not have to deal with that at all. For the shower here, we did end up putting in two 4-inch LED pot lights in the 3000K color, a nice warm color that is. And to make these cuts, you can see we just kind of made a template out of some spare foam and then used a 4-inch diamond hole saw bit on the grinder, cut these out, and it came out really clean. I spent the last couple years using the same type of epoxy for all of my outside corners, and of course, I can no longer source that epoxy, so this is 10X titanium. I had to make the switch over to this, and you would think that wouldn't be that big of a deal, but the old epoxy cured in a matter of hours, and this one in a matter of minutes, so my process has had to change, and I'm still kind of figuring it out. I think ultimately, in the long run, having a shorter cure time will end up being a better thing. However, anytime you're learning a new process, there is just kind of those growing pains. Trying to figure out the best way to use this product is a bit of a struggle. When I quoted this job and was planning it out, I thought to myself, well, at least there won't be much drywall work. And I was clearly wrong. This ceiling needed a ton of love. Partially when we did the demo, we unfortunately pulled a lot of the paper off around the edges there. Probably could have been a little more careful in that demo process, but sometimes when you're in that mode, you're not too worried about future you just want to get things ripped apart. Sebastian did have to seal up all of that paper, and then for some of these nastier joints here, he did mix up some sheetrock 45 to pre-fill everything, and then use the 6-inch fiber fuse for any paper repairs necessary. We did opt to go for a completely flush finish on the edge of the tile ceiling here, meaning no tile profile, and instead Sebastian just applied in this tearaway bead, which he then mudded up to, and this way, after he was completely finished mudding, he would tear away the bead and the drywall would appear flush with that tile and just have a very small shadow line, and I think this ended up being a really good decision. This was a whole new product and a new process to us, however, so were a lot of other things involved with this project. A very common piece of feedback I hear from people about their contractors is that they saw a product or they had an interest in a certain method or process, and when they brought it up to their contractor, they were shot down. And in a lot of cases, I completely understand. However, I also think there's a balance to be struck. I think that if you're a contractor, and maybe this is just my outlook, but I think we should always be trying to learn how to use new materials and try out different processes and just kind of see what's out there, because there is a lot of cool stuff that's available. Finally, it was time to grout, and this was a bittersweet moment. On the one hand, it immediately makes the space look so much nicer once things are grouted, but on the other hand, this is a terrible process. Epoxy grout, while I think it is a great product, is just really not a fun time to install, and even less fun to work with these accent tiles. This was a bit of a hassle, but we did just want to get these accent tiles done first, as it was a darker grout, and I didn't want to risk staining the white grout for the rest of the walls and floor as we were working with this. So we did just get this 100% complete, and then the next day we actually got started on that white grout for the rest of the tiles. Typically, I would suggest staying away from white grout. However, in this bathroom, the clients wanted it. It was definitely the best match for these tiles, and there are so few grout lines, this is an epoxy grout as well, that I did think it would be okay. There is a balancing act here. Whenever we're building these bathrooms, we have to try to balance maintenance versus aesthetic, function versus aesthetic, all sorts of different factors that are considered and then implemented. So for this bathroom, as an example, we have 1/16 grout lines on 24 by 48 inch tiles with an epoxy grout. So yes, there will still be some maintenance at the end of the day. That is a groove in which dirt, grime, and all sorts of other things can collect. However, it's not like we're doing a mosaic shower floor with a ton of exposed grout. All this new mud getting primed with CoverMax and then 2 coats of Sherwin-Williams premium ceiling paint. This area will be getting a bunch of steam passing over top of it to get to that exhaust fan, so we want to get some good coverage here and make sure we're using a really high quality paint for this. I have a confession to make, and that is that this tile here is not the original for the Axis panel. Originally, I tried grouting it in, however, the epoxy grout was just way too strong, and well, let's just say I did not get that first tile out in one piece. So, try again. This time I put some plywood backer on instead of that drywall, and then used a color match silicone to fill in those grout lines, and then just took a knife, cut alongside them, and it actually ended up really good. I just made use of some magnets to hold it in place, and then I cut the tile a little bit shorter. The idea there being that eventually you could slide in an Allen key, turn it, pull it out, and that is your mechanism for getting access to the tub components. I'm frequently asked what are my most liked and least liked parts of doing these bathroom renovations. And for my least, that is easy. It is definitely tile floor day. There's just something about crawling around in thin set that isn't for me. However, for my most enjoyed, I think it's probably these finishing days. There's just something very chill about them. You're just installing various fixtures, having a good time, and immediately starting to make the place look a whole lot nicer. Now, there are some exceptions, of course. I've been known, maybe 1 or 2 occasions, to have lost my cool a little bit when installing plumbing fixtures, but that happens to the best of us, I'm sure. Or, well, at least that's what I'd like to believe. Let me know if I'm alone in this, but every so often when I'm working with a certain product, I'm just thinking to myself the entire time, had the manufacturer actually installed this themselves? Like, surely there's someone out there that made this product and then had to install it, right? And then they said, yep, no, that's good, perfect, let's send them out, boys. I don't know, maybe that's just me. This was a very exciting day for us because these quartz pieces could finally get installed. I did have my countertop guy, Vic from A Granito World, come out, measure, and manufacture everything, delivered it to site, and then Sebastian and I were able to install all of these pieces. And this immediately made the space start to look really, really nice. We did just use the same 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch by 1/2 inch U-notch trowel, back buttering each piece, back buttered all the quartz pieces, set them into place, kind of move them as best we could to collapse those ridges, and then also use the vibrator tool to really ensure we're getting full coverage. The clients did opt to just go for a plain white quartz, and I think that was a really good decision. It matched the countertop for the vanity, and on top of that, it just kind of helped break things up a little bit. There was a point where they were a little worried about it being too busy in here, but I do think the solid white really helped with that factor, and it just turned out with a really clean look. I should also note that both for the bench piece as well as the bottom of the niche here, both of these did have just a bit of slope for water so they could get to that drain and not pool anywhere. And then for the the top of the niche, of course, we're going to be doing an accent light for this niche. So we needed a U channel to hold the LED strip. We did just take some CA glue to kind of glue that channel onto the quartz piece, and then took a bunch of thin set, troweled it out, and that would further cement that U channel into place. We locked everything in with some clamps. We just reversed them, made sure everything was nice and tight, and then let everything set up. The accent light here, I do just order these in from LED Montreal. I get some questions about that a lot. And this one here is a 24 volt IP67 COB LED light strip. It's once again in that 3000K warm color temperature, and then the U channel will get a diffuser over top to protect it further. The clients did go with a navy blue, dark blue vanity here, 84 inch from Wayfair, I believe, the Windhelm collection, and it was of a surprisingly decent quality. I do actually like this color choice as well. It just added a little bit of flavor to this bathroom and worked with the existing palette, or at least it did in my opinion. The countertop did just have single holes, so we did have to add a couple more to put in widespread faucets, which I also really like the look of. It's what I have in my own bathroom. And then putting up this giant LED mirror. Not gonna lie, I did have to get a hand for this. It was just too much for me to handle by myself. And then of course, what would this bathroom be without a towel warmer? So I did have some blocking back behind this wall here so I could get the 3 larger screws into, and the last leg, of course, acting for the hardwired connection. The last thing that we had to install was the tub components. So we had a filler, a handheld, a diverter, and then a cold and hot temperature control. Because of how the motor was kind of mounted in the tub, we did have to separate them a little bit. So the diverter and handheld went on one side, and then the filler and temperature controls on the other. I did just have 2 water lines, a hot and cold, below in the access panel. So there were shutoffs for those. That way you have access to shut these off if ever need be. And then all of the water lines connecting these pieces were also just ran through that access panel. And there we have it. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you are located here within the Mississauga or surrounding areas and are in need of a bathroom renovation, my website will be linked down below where you can submit a form and maybe we can work together one day. If you enjoyed the video, if I could just maybe ask as you leave, just hit that like button on your way out, or subscribe if you want to see more, as it enables me to keep making this type of content, and I would really appreciate it. And here is the cost breakdown, and I want you to keep a couple things in mind. 1, these are rough figures, they're not exact in any way. And 2, this is ridiculously cheap for what this bathroom turned out to be. A lot of times when I post these videos and share the cost breakdown, I have a lot of people kind of arguing over my prices and whether they're too high, too low. And I think most of the time that just kind of comes down to the area of which this is taking place more than anything. Someone in the Bay Area, of course, might be paying double, triple in labor as what you would pay here in the GTA. However, for this specific one, yeah, there's just no question, this was just very cheap. As I'd mentioned, I was willing to charge a lot lower in order to be able to do this, to try out a whole bunch of new things, and take on a project that really excited me. Anyways, that is it. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you have a beautiful day. this really clears up your airways.
It's definitely good for your soul and your well-being. That actually feels real good.